Namaskar. I'm Dr. Medha Bisht. I teach at the Department of International Relations, South Asian University, and I would like to thank HRDC JNU for inviting me for this lecture today. For the next half an hour, I will be talking about the relationship between Kautilya's Arthashastra and international relations theory. I'm sure this relationship is not unfamiliar to any of you. We generally box Arthashastra as one of the realist texts in international relations. But I'm going to unsettle this fact today. And perhaps to unsettle this fact, let me take you to the great debates of international relations. Now, interestingly, the great debates in international relations are considered to be the disciplinary identity of international relations. So much so that they have indeed also been criticized. The great debates have been called a myth. The great debates have been called useless. The great debates, as it is argued, also mislead us to understand the discipline. But still, I thought that in order to introduce Arthashastra and in order to establish that relationship between Arthashastra and IR theory, the great debates would become significantly important. Now, why are the great debates important? If you look at the first three debates, the most familiar ones, the first debate, the second debate, and the third debate, they are actually answering or addressing a very important question. And that question relates to the progress of knowledge or the purpose of knowledge. So when you look at the first debate, you see it as a paradigm war between the realists and the liberals. Of course, some argued that this paradigm included the radicals or the Marxists later. The second debate was essentially a debate around the scientific quest or the methodological quest of the discipline. So this was a debate, I would say, between the traditionalists and the scientists. Hedley Bull, a scholar, has in fact said that this was a debate between the scientists and the classicists. But essentially, this was about the method. The behavioral revolution, as you all know, was going in the 1950s. And the third debate is in fact the most interesting debate of all. We are in the third debate, and unlike the first and the second debates, the third debate has multiple stories to tell. And perhaps it's the third debate that I would like to focus on or perhaps draw your attention to. One story regarding the third debate is the thesis of incommensurability. And the thesis of incommensurability really emphasizes that the paradigm in international relations are incommensurable with each other. The second story in the third debate is about the binary between the positivists, the post-positivists, the rationalists, the reflectivists. And the third story in the great debate, in fact, really goes beyond this binary of the positivists and the rationalists. And in fact says that the purpose of social science is to produce reliable knowledge. How do you advance knowledge is something what social sciences should really be interested in. And one of the main reasons as to why this question came up in the third debate was because international relations had in fact poorly addressed the question of science. And scholars have written on it. You might look at the references which are circulated to you. But one of the core concerns regarding science was that science was equated with empirical analysis. Science was equated with positivist mode of thinking. But interestingly, if you look at the philosophy of science and you really go back to philosophers such as Karl Popper, such as Thomas Kuhn, such as Imre Lakatos, they in fact dwelled on the meaning of science, something which we call the demarcation problem between science and pseudoscience. So while Karl Popper really focused on falsifiability, Thomas Kuhn actually talked about paradigms as a mark for progress in knowledge. For him, the process itself was important, not the product, which Kuhn emphasized on. And interestingly, Lakatos takes this debate further. He talks about sophisticated falsification, and in fact, he borrows this whole idea of paradigms from Kuhn and introduces us to the research program, which he says could be degenerative and could be progressive. Now, why am I really taking you to this debate here? I'm taking you back to this debate here because one of the fundamental questions regarding all of these philosophers of science was the meaning of knowledge. How do you produce good science? How is good science different from bad science? And I guess this is very important. And the third debate, particularly, which talked about the meta theory or the purpose behind theories, become very important. And it is here in the third debate that perhaps I would like to draw your attention to Kautilya's Arthashastra. So where would Kautilya's Arthashastra really fall? Would it be the first debate, as we generally do? We box Arthashastra as a realist? Or should we really look at the second and the third debate? Unfortunately, these two debates and the discussion around this is missing in Arthashastra. So the third debate, as I said, is important, and I'm doing it at the cost of reiteration here. The question was really about what is knowledge, what is progress, and what is the purpose of knowledge in a discipline like international relations. And many scholars have responded to this question by looking at questions of meta theory. And meta theory is important to, I think, all the researchers, all the scholars in social sciences, because it differentiates between methodology and method. So when you're talking about the methodology, methodology is a study of methods. And methods, on the other hand, are essentially about techniques. So when we're talking about meta theory, and that's something which I would like to draw your attention to when I bring Arthashastra into the domain of international relations theory, meta theory is primarily a theory of theories. It explores the underlying assumptions on which a theory is based on. One can also say it is really the act of theorizing itself. So what it really tells us, it tells us to really understand the assumptions on which we base our knowledge on. And these assumptions can be based on the ontology, that is what is the object of study, and epistemology, how we approach the subject of study. And then, of course, methodology, which unfortunately sometimes, as Patrick Jackson says, mixes with method, really is about techniques of approaching this knowledge. And the reason why I talk about it here, when my primary focus is on Arthashastra, is that Arthashastra offers us a distinct methodology. It offers us a distinct meta-theory. And this meta-theory in Arthashastra has been articulated as Anavikshiki. So Anavikshiki, as Kautilya himself says, is the methodology of Arthashastra. And I would emphasize here that if one wants to make sense of Arthashastra, or if one wants to contemporize Arthashastra, one has to understand the meta-theory on which Arthashastra is based on. As I pointed out in the last lecture, the larger question in Arthashastra is essentially about the political. And when we're looking at the political, we're looking at Rajaniti and we're looking at Kutaniti. Going to the great debates really help us because it refrains us from boxing Arthashastra as a realist text or a constructivist text, as much of the literature in the field really tells you to do. But Anvikshiki, on the other hand, as that meta-theoretical lens, helps you to organize knowledge in a systematic manner. It helps you to identify the object of study, which is the ontology, and ways of producing knowledge, which is the epistemology. Now let me just emphasize or perhaps elaborate on this very famous quote, which I pick up from Arthashastra. And Kautilya says, Samkhya, Yoga, Lokayat, these constitute philosophy. So through Anvikshiki, what I'm really trying to say here is that Kautilya, in a way, through these three elements, is really trying to balance the material elements with the spiritual elements. Just look at these three philosophical traditions of Hindu philosophy. The Samkhya philosophy. Samkhya essentially starts from dualism but ends in non-dualism. It underlines the importance of discerning the distinct qualities formed through the fusion of the Purusha and the Prakriti. Yoga emphasizes on discipline, on meditation, on experiential knowledge, recognizing the need to discipline human nature. And in fact, the first few pages of the text are primarily on how the king should discipline himself. Because only if the king is disciplined will he be able to regulate order or to do Rajaniti. Lokayat, on the other hand, were the Charvaks, the materialist philosophy, primarily focusing on the materialist pursuits of the state, something which the word artha also emphasizes. So, if you look at these three philosophical traditions, one can say that Anvikshiki is therefore a kind of epistemic practice. It is a philosophy of logical reasoning which actually embraces contradictory Hindu philosophical traditions in terms of defining knowledge. Because there is a reference to the materialists and there is also a reference to the non-dualists. And there is also a reference to observation and experience. So when we get into the relevance of Anvikshiki as the meta-theory or the larger methodological framework in Arthashastra, I would say that this methodological framework helps us to anchor Arthashastra around the concept of the state, where the notion of holism was very important. And this notion of holism, in fact, connected the macrocosm with the microcosm. So where at the macro level, the idea of the state really became the moral agency, facilitating order, primarily understood as dharma here. At the micro level, the idea of the state inspired the four ends of human life, which were primarily the Purusharthas. And when you look at the Purusharthas, they were primarily expressed as ethical goodness, which was dharma, wealth and power, which is arth, pleasure, which is kama, and spiritual transcendence, which was moksha. Arthashastra, in fact, elaborates on the outstanding qualities of the state, which is indicative of the capacity of the state, the Saptanga theory, and how should stratagems and techniques, when employed through statecraft, can actually help in achieving these outstanding features. So it is in this respect that when you look at the text called Arthashastra, the desirable and the feasible elements of Kautilyan state and statecraft become apparent, and in fact they indeed can be reconciled with each other. As I said, this methodology of Anvikshiki talks about holism, taking both the micro and the macro factors into account, taking the idea of state into account, but as well as taking the individual into account. And the relevance of Anvikshiki, in fact, becomes primary in terms of Kautilya putting certain qualifications when he's really talking about certain specific policies. Now, I thought that this link between the micro and the macro needs to be really engaged in much more detail. And why I focus on the macro and the micro, which perhaps the concept of dharma and the concept of the Samkhya Yoga and Lokayat really try to emphasize on, is because of the braided nature of the micro and the macro narratives. So just for instance, when you look at Mahabharata becomes a very important text, because while it is one meta-narrative, that one meta-narrative have multiple micro-narratives embedded in it. And therefore the micro and the macro, the insight that we get from Arthashastra, were not very divorced from each other. They were interrelated with each other. And in order to draw this relationship between the macro and micro, as a student of international relations, or perhaps to make it more intelligible to the student of international relations, I would in fact really take resort to systems theory here, or systems analysis, which helps to focus on units, helps us to focus on interaction between units, and it tells the story through the interconnection of concepts or variables, which primarily privileges situational or contextual nature of knowledge. So systems analysis, I would say, also helps one to emancipate the holism of a grand strategic design in Kautilya's Arthashastra, which gave meaning to action at the micro level. It gave meaning to terms like power, order, morality, which find a very important place in Kautilya's Arthashastra. So based on the theoretical lens here, what I would like to emphasize is that what we really see in Arthashastra is a more relational reading. And what I mean by a relational reading is that when we are really talking about these concepts such as power, such as order, such as morality, they need to be understood in a relational manner, which means that they were directed towards achieving yogashem, which primarily was the security and the well-being of the people. And I would say that this was really central. This was one of the primary principles for guiding the dharma of the king, as well as informing the dharma of the people. So one of the primary arguments or conclusions that one can really draw from Kautilya's Arthashastra, or one of the basic takeaways for us, is that dharma then becomes a fluid interlocutor of sorts. And what it really emphasizes on, it primarily emphasizes on the concept of relational ontology. And what this means is that the object of study in Kautilya's Arthashastra are primarily interactions, are primarily relations, are primarily processes, are primarily practices. And another aspect which comes from Kautilya's Arthashastra is that it urges us to go beyond the fixed attributes of a state that actually characterize much of the behavior of states in international relations, as the realist theory would tell you, as the neo-realist theory would tell you, because there are specific attributes there which govern the behavior of the state. It is very essentialist in character. On the other hand, when you look at Kautilya's Arthashastra, as I pointed out in the last lecture also, the state is not a given. It evolves over a period of time organically, dependent on the excellencies that it has. And the three criteria, which Kautilya again emphasizes on when he's talking about the Kautilyan state, are these interactions which can be communicated through the kind of connections which a state makes, the kind of communications which a state adopts, and also the relations which a state has. Now let me just elaborate on this aspect, which I'm sure would be bothering your mind. So when I talk about Arthashastra being a relational text, when I really talk about Arthashastra, talking about relational practices, I want to draw your attention to the genre of strategies that the text really talks about. And I think that becomes very important if one has to find really the meaning of what Arthashastra really offers to us. Now, when you look at the genre of strategies, it primarily ranges from tactics such as non-verbal communication, positive and negative manipulation. Interestingly, when you look at San, Dan, Bheda and Dand, San, Dan are primarily strategies for positive manipulation. Bhed and Dand is primarily negative manipulation. Arthashastra as a text, when it's really talking about interactions, interrelations, it's talking about espionage as being one of the primary criteria. And interestingly, Arthashastra is also representative of multiple dialogical traditions. And it is here that the macro and the micro braidedness of the text becomes important. And that is the reason why the state appears to be centralized, why both the physical and the natural environment is very much part of the Kautilyan state, and how it needs to be managed not only through force, but through ideational factors which at that point of time were primarily drawn from the Hindu philosophical tradition. And this Hindu philosophical tradition was eclectic because it embraced contradictory thoughts through the concept of Anvikshiki. Another aspect which really comes out in Arthashastra are really the building blocks of the state. And this is something, as I said again, state is not given, does not really have fixed attributes, but it is really composed of allies, it's composed of ministers, it's composed of treasury, it's composed of defense, which primarily is indicative of a plural understanding of power. And the intertwining of these elements become very important because they really give meaning to power, they give meaning to order, they give meaning to morality, and they give meaning to justice. So let me just talk about the relationship between knowledge and practice. And one of the relationship between knowledge and practice is the ways of thinking. And there is where I would say non-Western texts are very important because these geographies of thought are very important. These geographies of thought tell you how to understand certain concepts like power, order, morality, etc. And finally, some basic insights. I would say that instead of fitting Kautilya's Arthashastra into a particular theory, it is important to understand it from a metatheoretical perspective. Anavikshiki, or the philosophy of knowledge, is that metatheoretical perspective that Arthashastra offers. And finally, Arthashastra offers a holistic understanding, a combination of methods where both empirical, that is positivist, and reflectivist, that is post-positivist traditions become important for understanding phenomena outside. I'm sure you all will be wondering as to where does this analysis lead us to. Going back to the so what question, which students of international relations are so familiar with when they write their PhD or doctoral thesis. The so what question definitely is important and to address primarily because it directs our attention to a much more serious question of contemporizing Arthashastra. Well, we did talk about metatheory. We did talk about the methodology in Arthashastra which helps giving meaning to the idea of political in terms of state and statecraft. And this metatheoretical question needs to be contemporized, needs to be seen in terms of the utility it really has for the student of international relations. So I thought that for the next 10 minutes perhaps, I will address this specific question, given that Arthashastra is a view from South Asia, not on South Asia. Many a times when we talk about South Asian perspective, I wonder what it is. And it is here that I have really tried to draw your attention to geographies of thought. These geographies of thought are important because they give a distinct meaning to the way we define state, sovereignty, order, rights, justice, etc. And this is the primary debate, I would say, in international relations today, where scholars have been using terms like post-Western, global international relations, non-Western. And more than that, I would say that Kautilya's understanding of Anvikshiki is really about the way of thinking, and this way of thinking needs to be emancipated if we are to move beyond a post-colonial South Asia. It is also a stark reminder, to an extent, to our forgotten intellectual legacies. So while Arthashastra is definitely inspired by Hindu philosophical tradition, I would say Buddhist philosophical tradition or Jain philosophical tradition equally has some value to add to the specific ways of thinking. And I do hope that Indian IR can make specific contribution in this regard. Perhaps what I'll do now is that I'll pick up maybe 5 points, and these 5 points, to my mind, would really help us making sense of Arthashastra in the contemporary world. To a student or a researcher who's really trying to understand the complex problems of 21st century, can Arthashastra really help us? The first point which I would like to highlight here is really the interconnectedness between the internal and the external. As IR students, we are very much aware of the inside-outside divide. But this dualistic thinking of the inside and the outside is absent in Arthashastra. State is very much a part of statecraft. Governance is very much a part of foreign policy. So if you need effective foreign policy, or good neighborhood policy, I would say in the context of South Asia, the internal constituent elements of the state really become important. And I think it is here that for a student of international relations, debates or discourses around development are equally strategic. So this is one aspect which I thought I would like to highlight, because the inside-outside dichotomy is absent in Arthashastra. The second important insight, again, which can be significant, I would say, to a student of international relations, is the macro and the micro narrative. I had pointed out earlier in my lecture too that the micro and the meta-narratives, the micro-narratives and the macro-narratives are actually intertwined, or they are braided in Indian philosophical tradition. And this indeed is very important, because while we might have a meta understanding of diplomacy, while we might have a meta understanding of development, how does this meta understanding of development or diplomacy really speak to the partial perspectives of the people on the ground? So for instance, let me invoke an example of water diplomacy here. South Asia, in fact, marks itself out, perhaps because it has negotiated agreements with all the neighboring countries. But at the same time, if you look at the micro-narratives of the people, these micro-narratives of the people seem distant from the meta-narratives. We focused on issues related to water quantity, but I think water quality issues too need attention. And I think the meta and the micro needs to be braided when we are really talking about diplomacy from a quote-unquote Cotelian perspective. The third important aspect that again is very important to South Asia is the diplomatic culture of South Asia. Now, if you look at the diplomatic culture of South Asia, much of the debates, though definitely we've made progress, remains overshadowed or burdened by the perceptions which we had in the 1960s and the 1970s. We definitely are moving ahead. I'm not saying that we're not making progress, but the diplomatic culture and the insight we get from on diplomatic culture from Kautilya's Arthashastra is to have flexibility in approaches, is to have some adaptability. And this flexibility, this adaptability, this dynamism, I think is an intrinsic part of diplomatic behavior which Arthashastra would suggest. So not to have a rigid foreign policy is something that Kautilya will warn or caution you of. Looking at the context, the changing environment, both internal and external, is really key to understanding or contemporarizing Arthashastra. Fourth, another Another aspect which I would say comes from Indian philosophical tradition is the very notion of communication. And this is very important because the text, particularly Kautilya's Arthashastra, talks about non-verbal communication more than verbal communication. It doesn't really, it's not a text on negotiations or on negotiations theory, but it's really on how you really communicate to the other person non-verbally. And the upayas, the san, dan, danda, bhed that I really talked about before, positive manipulation and negative manipulation is primarily a pointer to this. Also, when one is really talking about non-verbal communication, I think the 6 methods of foreign policy are an indicator of non-verbal communication. So, communication, therefore, is very important, and how you communicate need not just focus on verbal communication, but on non-verbal communication. And finally, I would say the last point which is significantly important is the notion of dharma. Dharma was the overarching category in Kautilya's Arthashastra, and we need to really look at some of the debates which animated the discourses in modern India. Look at the debate between Gandhi and Tagore, and where Gandhi's understanding of dharma really went back to the Vedic tradition. Tagore's understanding of dharma went back to the Upanishads and more of the Bhakti and the Sufi movements. Interestingly, if you look at understanding of dharma in Buddhism, it really gives you another way of thinking. And I would just like to end here that where in Kautilya's Arthashastra there is a mention of the upayas, which means in Lotus Sutra, the Mahayana chapter of Buddhism, the emphasis is on Sakushala Upaya, which is skillful communication. And I think this intellectual legacy, rich, diverse legacy of South Asia needs to be explored, needs to be examined by us who are students of international relations in the global South. Thank you.